The morning of the first robbery began like every other Monday in Brookdale. The town woke slowly, stretching itself into the day with the soft rhythm of routine. Shop owners unlocked their doors. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery on Maple Street. The same cars rolled through the same intersections at the same time. Nothing ever rushed in Brookdale. Nothing ever surprised anyone. Rivertown Bank sat on the corner of Main and Willow, a modest brick building that looked more like a town hall than a financial institution. Hanging flower baskets framed the entrance, and a small brass plaque beside the door proudly announced the bank's opening year, 1978. Inside, the floors were polished to a soft shine, and the walls were painted a warm beige that made customers feel comfortable the moment they stepped in. At 8:55 a.m., the employees gathered for their usual morning routine. Melissa Carter placed her purse beneath the counter and turned on her computer. She had worked at the bank for 8 years and could prepare her station with her eyes closed. Her desk held a small cactus plant, a photo of her golden retriever, and a ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Employee." Across the lobby, branch manager Harold Simmons adjusted his tie while reviewing paperwork. He was a man who valued quiet mornings and predictable days. Mondays were usually busy, but never chaotic. People came in to deposit paychecks, open savings accounts, or chat about interest rates like they were discussing the weather. At exactly 9 a.m., the doors unlocked with a soft click. The first customers trickled in slowly. A retired couple heading to their weekly grocery trip. A young mother balancing a toddler on her hip while holding a stack of bills. A construction worker depositing his paycheck before heading to a job site. Familiar faces. Familiar smiles. Familiar conversations. Melissa greeted each person warmly, her voice cheerful and practiced. She enjoyed this part of her job. The sense of community. The quiet trust people placed in the bank. At 9:07 a.m., the glass doors opened again. No one noticed at first. The man who stepped inside did not look dangerous. He wore a gray hoodie, plain jeans, and clean white sneakers. A baseball cap sat low over his face, and dark sunglasses hid his eyes. It wasn't unusual for customers to dress casually. Brookdale wasn't a town where anyone judged appearances. He paused just inside the entrance, as if adjusting to the lighting, then walked toward the line forming in front of the tellers. He didn't rush. He didn't look around nervously. He simply joined the line like any other customer waiting for his turn. Melissa glanced at him briefly while finishing a transaction. Something about him felt ordinary, forgettable. If she had seen him on the street later that day, she wouldn't have recognized him. He stood quietly behind the construction worker, hands in his hoodie pockets, shoulders relaxed. The lobby hummed with soft conversation and the occasional ring of a desk phone. Nothing about the moment suggested it would soon become the most talked-about event in Brookdale's recent history. When his turn came, he stepped forward. Melissa offered her usual smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" The man didn't speak immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it gently across the counter. Melissa unfolded the note, expecting to read a list of account numbers or a written withdrawal request. At first, the words didn't make sense. They didn't fit the quiet setting or the gentle tone of the morning. "Please give me $3,000 in cash. No alarm. No sudden moves. I don't want to hurt anyone." Her breath caught in her throat. She read the note again, hoping she had misunderstood. Her heartbeat began to thump loudly in her ears. Slowly, she looked up. The man stood calmly, his expression hidden behind sunglasses. His posture was relaxed, almost patient, as though he were waiting for a routine transaction to be completed. Melissa's mind raced through the training videos she had watched years earlier. Stay calm. Don't argue. Don't panic. Cooperate. Her hands trembled as she opened the cash drawer. Every sound suddenly felt louder. The soft clink of coins, the whisper of paper bills sliding against each other, the quiet hum of the air conditioner. No one else in the bank noticed what was happening. The line behind him remained calm. Conversations continued. Somewhere in the background, someone laughed. Melissa counted the money carefully, terrified of making a mistake. When she placed the cash on the counter, the man nodded once in appreciation. He folded the bills neatly and slipped them into his pocket. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice was calm and polite, the tone of someone accepting a receipt or directions. Then he turned and walked out of the bank. The entire interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes. Melissa stood frozen, her hand still resting on the counter. Her brain struggled to catch up with what had just happened. The lobby looked exactly the same as it had moments earlier. The same customers, the same quiet conversations, the same peaceful town outside the windows. It didn't feel real. Finally, she pressed the silent alarm button beneath the desk. The police arrived quickly, sirens echoing through the streets of Brookdale. Customers were asked to leave. Officers took statements and checked security cameras. The once peaceful lobby filled with tension and confusion. Harold Simmons paced nervously near his office. "Are you sure it was a robbery?" he asked Melissa gently, as if hoping the answer might somehow change. She nodded, still pale. He didn't show a weapon. He didn't threaten anyone. But it was a robbery. The security footage revealed frustratingly little. The man had positioned himself in a blind spot between two cameras. His face remained hidden the entire time. No fingerprints were found on the counter. The note had been printed from a standard home printer. No clues. No leads. Nothing useful. By noon, the news had spread across Brookdale. Conversations in cafes and grocery stores buzzed with disbelief. A bank robbery in their town felt like something from a movie, not real life. Detectives assured the public the suspect would be caught quickly. Crimes like this were rare and usually solved fast. But as the day ended and the sun dipped below the rooftops, the case remained empty. No witnesses had seen where the man went after leaving the bank. No cameras outside captured a clear image. It was as if he had walked out the door and disappeared into thin air. That night, Melissa sat at home replaying the moment over and over in her mind. The calm voice. The polite nod. The quiet thank you. It didn't feel like the behavior of a desperate criminal. It felt planned, careful, deliberate. 2 weeks later, at 9:07 a.m., the doors of Rivertown Bank opened once again, and the man in the gray hoodie walked in. The second robbery began with a feeling no one in Rivertown Bank could fully describe. It was not fear at first. It was something quieter and more unsettling, like the sense that a storm was forming somewhere far away even though the sky still looked clear. 2 weeks had passed since the first robbery, and life in Brookdale had tried to return to normal. The police had increased patrols around the bank. The staff had attended emergency training sessions. New security posters hung in the break room, reminding employees of procedures they hoped never to use again. Melissa Carter had not slept well since that Monday. Every time the bank doors opened, her heart jumped. Every unfamiliar face made her nervous. She hated feeling this way. Brookdale had always felt safe, predictable, comfortable. On the morning of the second robbery, she arrived early. She told herself she wanted extra time to prepare. But the truth was she felt uneasy at home and preferred the familiarity of her desk and the quiet hum of the office computers. Harold Simmons tried to keep morale high. He walked through the lobby with forced confidence, greeting employees with cheerful comments that sounded slightly louder than usual. He insisted everything would be fine. The police were watching. The suspect would not risk returning. Everyone wanted to believe him. At 9 a.m., the doors unlocked again. Customers entered in their usual slow, friendly rhythm. A college student depositing a birthday check. A florist dropping off the weekend earnings. The routine returned piece by piece, like a puzzle reassembling itself. Melissa allowed herself to relax slightly. Maybe the worst had already happened. Maybe the robber had moved on to another town. At 9:07 a.m., the glass doors opened. Her stomach dropped before her brain understood why. The man in the gray hoodie stepped inside. He looked exactly the same. The same sunglasses. The same cap. The same calm, steady walk toward the line of customers. Melissa felt the air leave her lungs. She couldn't breathe. Her hands went cold, and the room suddenly felt too bright and too loud. He joined the line again, standing patiently behind an elderly man filling out a deposit slip. No one else reacted. No one else recognized him. To everyone else, he was just another customer. Melissa wanted to scream, to run, to press the alarm immediately, but the training echoed in her mind. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Follow instructions. Her turn came faster than she wanted. He stepped forward. He slid the folded note across the counter. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Please give me $3,500 in cash. No alarm. No sudden moves. I don't want to hurt anyone. The message was nearly identical to the first. Only the amount had changed. Melissa swallowed hard and forced herself to breathe slowly. She opened the cash drawer again, trying to move as naturally as possible. The sound of counting bills felt painfully loud, like the entire room could hear each flick of paper. When she handed him the money, he nodded politely once more. "Thank you," he said softly, and then he walked out. Again. The second robbery ended before most people in the bank realized it had begun. This time, the silence afterward felt heavier, more frightening. The first robbery had felt like an accident, a rare moment of bad luck. The second felt intentional. The police arrived even faster than before. Officers blocked off the streets. Detectives interviewed everyone inside the bank. The tension was thicker now, filled with questions no one could answer. Why the same bank? Why the same time? Why the same calm behavior? Detective Aaron Blake stepped into the case that afternoon. He was known for his patience and attention to detail, a man who believed every crime told a story if you listened carefully enough. He watched the security footage from both robberies repeatedly. The man's movements were smooth and confident. He never hesitated. He never looked nervous. He moved through the lobby like someone who already knew the layout by heart. Blake leaned back in his chair and frowned. Most robbers were unpredictable, emotional, desperate. This man was none of those things. This man was comfortable. By the time the third robbery happened, the town had begun whispering about the mysterious criminal. News reporters arrived from nearby cities. Headlines called him polite, calm, and strangely invisible. After the fifth robbery, the nickname appeared in print for the first time. The Ghost Robber. The name stuck immediately. It captured the strange reality everyone felt but could not explain. He appeared without warning and vanished without a trace. No car sightings. No witnesses. No clues. Rivertown Bank upgraded its security systems after the sixth robbery. New cameras were installed in every corner. A uniformed security guard stood near the entrance each morning. The bank felt less welcoming and more like a fortress. Customers noticed the change. Conversations in line became quieter. People glanced nervously at the door whenever it opened. 2 weeks later, at 9:06 a.m., the ghost robber returned. The security guard later admitted he had watched the man enter and felt nothing unusual. There had been no weapon, no threatening behavior, just a quiet man waiting his turn in line. The robbery succeeded again. Detective Blake's frustration grew with every passing week. He studied the footage frame by frame, searching for anything unusual. A limp, a tattoo, a reflection in the glass, anything. But the robber left no trace. He began to question the bank employees again, one by one. He asked about routines, schedules, security checks, maintenance visits. He searched for anything that could explain how the robber avoided every obstacle. Still, nothing stood out. By the 10th robbery, Brookdale's sense of safety had begun to change. People locked their doors at night. Shop owners installed cameras. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them go alone. The robber had never hurt anyone. He had never raised his voice. Yet his presence unsettled the entire town. Because he kept coming back. The same bank. The same day. The same time. It felt less like a crime and more like a ritual. Blake spent long nights studying the case files. He filled notebooks with observations and questions. One thought kept returning to him again and again. Criminals do not repeat the same mistake. They change locations. They adapt. They dissipate. But this man did the opposite. He returned to the same place with perfect confidence, as if he knew he could never be caught. Blake stared at the wall of photographs and reports, feeling the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. Somewhere inside this pattern was an answer. He just hadn't found it yet. And while the town waited for the police to stop the ghost robber, the man in the gray hoodie quietly prepared for his next visit. By the time the ghost robber reached his 18th visit to Rivertown Bank, Detective Aaron Blake felt as if he had spent months chasing a shadow that knew every move he would make before he made it. The case had begun as a puzzle, then slowly transformed into something closer to an obsession. Every morning he woke with the same question pressing into his thoughts before he even opened his eyes. What am I missing? The town of Brookdale had changed in subtle ways since the robberies began. People still smiled at each other in grocery store aisles, but the smiles ended faster now. Conversations drifted back to the same topic over and over. No one spoke the robber's nickname out loud in public anymore, but everyone knew it. Everyone thought about him every time they passed Rivertown Bank. Inside the police station, a wall had been dedicated entirely to the case. It was covered in photographs, printed emails, bank reports, and scribbled notes taped together with bright strips of colored tape. Dates circled and red markers stretched across the wall like a timeline of frustration. Blake stood in front of it almost every day, coffee cooling in his hand while he searched for meaning in the pattern of numbers and paper. 18 robberies, 18 identical mornings, 18 quiet entrances and exits that lasted only minutes but left behind weeks of confusion. The details never changed. Monday morning, just after the bank opened, a note slid across the counter, a polite voice, a calm walk out the door. The consistency began to bother Blake more than the crime itself. Criminals made mistakes. They slipped up, grew careless, changed their routines. This man did none of those things. He behaved like someone following a schedule instead of committing a crime. One evening, long after most officers had gone home, Blake remained at his desk surrounded by files. Rain tapped gently against the windows, filling the room with a steady rhythm that matched the slow turning of pages. He opened the folder containing the robbery dates again. Even though he had memoized them weeks earlier, he traced his finger along the list, whispering the dates under his breath as if repeating them might unlock their secret. January 4th, January 18th, February 1st, February 15th. Every 2 weeks. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the realization slowly settled into his thoughts. It wasn't random. It wasn't convenience. It was a schedule. Blake pushed his chair back and walked to the evidence wall. He began writing the dates again, larger this time, spacing them evenly across the board. When he stepped back, the pattern looked almost mathematical. Clean, predictable, intentional. He felt the first spark of excitement he had experienced in weeks. This was not a man improvising. This was a man planning. The next morning, Blake asked for a complete list of Brookdale's public events. Festivals, parades, school fundraisers, marathons, fairs, charity drives. Anything that brought crowds into town. His partner looked confused when he explained the request. What do town events have to do with a bank robbery? Blake wasn't sure yet. He just felt a connection somewhere deep in his instincts. By afternoon, the list arrived in a thick stack of printed pages. Blake spread them across a conference table and began comparing dates. At first, nothing stood out. The pages were filled with names of small-town traditions and celebrations that seemed harmless and unrelated. Then he noticed the first match. A Wintercraft festival had taken place the Saturday before the third robbery. He checked the next date. A charity fund run had happened the weekend before the fourth robbery. Blake felt his heartbeat quicken. He moved faster, flipping pages, scanning dates, circling matches with a red pen. Each robbery lined up perfectly with the Monday following a major town event. The realization hit him like a sudden burst of light in a dark room. The robber wasn't choosing random Mondays. He was choosing specific Mondays. Mondays after Brookdale's busiest weekends. Blake stayed at the list, trying to understand why that mattered. What changed after these events? What made those mornings different from every other day? He walked to the window and looked out at the quiet streets, imagining the crowds that filled them during festivals. Tourists, vendors, temporary workers, security staff, maintenance crews. Security. The word echoed in his thoughts like a bell ringing in an empty hallway. He rushed back to his desk and pulled out the bank security reports. He flipped through pages of maintenance logs and inspection schedules until he found the section he had skimmed past weeks earlier. Alarm system testing. The bank security company performed routine tests after major town events to ensure the system had not been disrupted by increased electrical usage and network traffic. The alarms were placed in test mode during the checks. In test mode, alarms did not automatically notify the police. Blake read the sentence 3 times before the meaning fully settled in. The ghost robber wasn't lucky. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Blake felt a mix of excitement and dread as the truth formed in his mind. Whoever this man was, he understood the bank security system deeply. He knew the schedules, the procedures, the small details no ordinary person would notice. This was not a random criminal. This was someone connected to the system itself. For the first time since the case began, Blake felt close to the answer. He requested a list of every employee and contractor who had ever worked on Rivertown Bank's alarm system. The request took days to process. Years of records had to be reviewed, archive files reopened, old company databases searched. While he waited, the 19th robbery came and went exactly as expected. Monday morning, 9:07 a.m. A note, a quiet exit. But this time, Blake watched the footage with a different perspective. He wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. He was looking at someone who belonged in the background of the bank's history. Someone who had once walked its halls without suspicion. When the list finally arrived, it was longer than he expected. Dozens of names filled several pages. Technicians, supervisors, inspectors, contractors, people who had installed wires, tested sensors, configured software. Blake began the slow process of reviewing each name. He searched employment histories, background checks, and addresses. Most had moved away years ago. Others had solid alibis or worked far from Brookdale. Hours turned into days as he eliminated name after name, until one remained. Daniel Reeves, a former security technician who had worked for the alarm company 5 years earlier. He had been part of the team that installed Rivertown Bank's current system. Blake read the file carefully. Reeves had left the company 1 year before the first robbery. No criminal record. No disciplinary issues. No obvious reason for suspicion. He looked ordinary, which somehow made him more suspicious. Blake stared at the photograph attached to the file. The man in the picture smiled politely at the camera, his expression calm and unremarkable. Ordinary. Forgettable. Just like the man in the gray hoodie. For the first time in months, the mystery began to feel real. Tangible. Solvable. Blake placed the photograph on the evidence wall and stepped back, studying the timeline again. The robberies no longer looked random. They looked like a plan unfolding exactly as intended. Somewhere in Brookdale, the ghost robber was living a normal life, waiting patiently for the next Monday morning. And now, for the first time, Detective Blake had a name to go with the shadow. The discovery of Daniel Reeves' name changed the entire atmosphere inside the Brookdale Police Department. For months the investigation had felt like chasing smoke. Now, suddenly, the smoke had a shape, a face, a place to start. Detective Aaron Blake printed Reeves' file and read it over and over, searching for something that explained how an ordinary man could become the most mysterious criminal the town had ever known. Daniel Reeves was 39 years old. He lived alone in a modest one-story house, just outside Brookdale's town limits, surrounded by a narrow stretch of land and a wooden fence that had started to fade with age. According to his records, he worked part-time repairing household electronics and security systems. He had no criminal history, no unpaid debts, no history of violence, no obvious signs of a double life. Everything about him looked quiet and ordinary, and that was exactly what made Blake uneasy. The next step had to be careful. After so many robberies, the police could not risk scaring their suspect away. If Reeves truly was the ghost robber, he had proven himself patient and precise. One wrong move could make him disappear forever. Surveillance began quietly. Unmarked cars parked far enough from Reeves' house to avoid suspicion. Officers rotated shifts, watching his routine from a distance. For the first few days, nothing unusual happened. Reeves woke early. He drank coffee on his porch. He drove into town for small repair jobs. He stopped at the grocery store once a week. He returned home before sunset most evenings and rarely went out at night. He looked exactly like the kind of man no one would ever suspect. Blake watched the surveillance footage late into the evenings, trying to find something that felt wrong. A strange visitor, a late-night trip, a hidden pattern. But Reeves' life moved with the same slow rhythm as the rest of Brookdale. Weeks passed. The next robbery date crept closer. The entire department felt the tension building. This time would be different. This time they were ready. The plan was simple. Officers would be stationed inside Rivertown Bank before opening hours. Others would wait outside. If Reeves entered the bank and attempted another robbery, he would be arrested immediately. On the morning of the planned stakeout, Blake arrived before sunrise. The streets were still dark and empty, the air cold enough to fog his breath. The bank looked peaceful, almost innocent, under the pale glow of the streetlights. Inside, officers moved quietly, positioning themselves out of sight. Some waited in offices. Others stood behind locked doors or watched security monitors in silence. No one spoke louder than a whisper. The minutes passed slowly. At 8:59 a.m., the bank employees unlocked the doors, pretending it was a normal morning. Their smiles looked real enough to customers, but Blake could see the tension in their eyes. At 9:05 a.m., nothing had happened. At 9:06 a.m., the glass doors opened. Daniel Reeves stepped inside. He wore the gray hoodie, the baseball cap, the sunglasses. For a moment, no one moved. The months of mystery and speculation suddenly stood in front of them, real and breathing. Reeves paused near the entrance, exactly as he had in the security footage, then calmly joined the line of customers. Blake watched from behind a partially closed office door, his heartbeat loud in his ears. The man's posture was relaxed, his movements smooth and unhurried. There was no sign of panic or hesitation. He looked completely at ease. The line moved forward. One customer finished. Then another. Reeves stepped up to the counter. Melissa Carter stood waiting. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her expression calm. Reeves slid the folded note across the counter. Before Melissa could reach for it, Blake stepped forward. "Daniel Reeves," he said clearly, "you're under arrest." The entire bank froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Customers turned in confusion. The quiet morning shattered into stunned silence. Reeves looked up slowly. For the first time, the officers saw his eyes as he removed his sunglasses. There was no fear in them. No surprise. Only a tired acceptance, as though he had been expecting this moment for a long time. He nodded once and placed his hands calmly on the counter. "It took you long enough," he said. The word sent a ripple of shock through the room. Officers moved quickly, securing his wrists in handcuffs and guiding him toward the exit. Customers watched in disbelief as the man who had haunted their town for months walked past them quietly, without resistance. Outside, the flashing lights of police cars reflected against the bank windows. The ghost robber had finally been caught. News spread through Brookdale faster than it ever had before. By afternoon, reporters filled the streets. Cameras pointed toward the police station. Residents gathered in small groups, whispering and sharing theories. The mystery was over. Also, everyone believed. When detectives searched Reeves' home, they expected to find stacks of cash hidden in walls or buried beneath floorboards. After nearly 30 robberies, the stolen total should have been well over $100,000. Instead, they found almost nothing. The house was simple and tidy. A couch, a television, a small kitchen with neatly arranged dishes, a modest bedroom with a single bed and a wooden dresser. Inside the closet, officers discovered a small metal lockbox. Blake felt a surge of anticipation as he opened it. Inside were a few $1,000s in cash. No more. Blake stared at the bills in disbelief. This couldn't be right. Months of robberies, weeks of planning, years of risk, and this was all that remained? The search continued. Every drawer opened. Every cabinet checked. Every inch of the property examined. No hidden money appeared. No secret accounts were discovered. No expensive purchases suggested a hidden fortune. The ghost robber had stolen over $100,000, and almost all of it had vanished. Back at the station, Reeves sat calmly in the interrogation room. His posture was relaxed, his expression neutral. He looked more like a man waiting for a bus than someone facing decades in prison. Blake entered the room and placed a folder on the table. He studied Reeves for a moment, trying to understand the quiet man behind months of chaos. "We searched your house," Blake said. "Where's the money?" Reeves didn't answer immediately. He stared at the tabletop, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. "I never kept it." The words hung in the air like a puzzle missing its final piece. Blake frowned. "You robbed the same bank nearly 30 times. You expect me to believe you didn't keep the money?" Reeves met his eyes calmly. "I didn't say I didn't take it," he replied. "I said I didn't keep it." The mystery that had haunted Brookdale for months suddenly grew deeper. The arrest everyone thought would bring answers had only created a new question. If Daniel Reeves hadn't kept the money, then where had it gone? And why had he risked everything to steal it in the first place? Blake left the interrogation room with a growing sense that the truth behind the ghost robber was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The question of the missing money became the center of everything after Daniel Reeves' arrest. The town expected a confession filled with greed or desperation. They expected hidden bank accounts, secret investments, or a buried stash waiting to be uncovered. Instead, they were given silence and a single sentence that refused to leave Detective Blake's mind. "I never kept it." The interrogation room felt smaller each time Blake entered it. Daniel Reeves always sat in the same position, hands folded on the table, posture relaxed, eyes steady. He never asked for anything except water. He never raised his voice. He never looked nervous. It was as if he had already accepted whatever outcome waited for him. Blake sat across from him and opened the case file once again, though by now he knew every detail by heart. The list of robbery dates, the total amount stolen, the photographs from the bank cameras, the timeline that had consumed months of his life. "You planned everything," Blake said quietly. "You knew the alarm schedule. You knew the camera blind spots. You knew exactly when to strike. You risked prison every 2 weeks for years. People don't do that without a reason." Reeves nodded slightly, as though agreeing with the statement. "So tell me the reason," Blake continued. "Where did the money go?" For a long moment, Reeves said nothing. The silence stretched until it felt heavy enough to touch. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of weight from his chest. "It started 20 years ago," he said. Blake listened carefully, sensing that the truth was finally beginning to surface. Reeves explained that his parents had once trusted Rivertown Bank completely. They were not wealthy people. They ran a small hardware store and saved money slowly over decades. Every dollar they earned represented years of hard work and long days. Then the bank's new digital accounting system arrived. Customers were told it would make everything faster and safer. For most people, it did. But for some, small errors began appearing. Minor discrepancies. Missing amounts that were easy to overlook. $20 here. $50 there. Small enough to ignore. Small enough to assume it was a mistake. Reeves' parents noticed the missing money quickly. At first, they thought they had made an error themselves. They checked receipts and statements late into the night, trying to find the mistake. When they finally approached the bank, they were told the system was accurate. The missing money, they were told, must have been a misunderstanding. Weeks turned into months. The missing amounts grew larger. The stress grew heavier. Reeves described watching his parents become exhausted and frustrated as they fought a battle they did not understand. They weren't asking for charity, Reeves said quietly. They just wanted what was theirs. Blake listened without interrupting. He could hear the quiet anger in Reeves' voice, controlled but deeply rooted. According to Reeves, his parents filed complaints and requested investigations. They were told the system had been checked and no errors were found. Eventually, the case was closed. The bank moved on. But his parents could not. The missing money had been their safety net, their future, their retirement. Without it, their store began to struggle. Bills piled up. Repairs were delayed. Small problems became large ones. Within 3 years, they lost the store. Within 5 years, they lost their home. Blake noticed Reeves' hands tighten slightly on the table as he spoke. They worked their entire lives, Reeves continued. And when they needed help, the bank told them they were wrong. Years later, both of his parents passed away. Reeves described their final years as quiet and heavy, filled with the kind of disappointment that never truly fades. Blake sat in silence, realizing the story was no longer about robbery. It was about something older and deeper. After his parents' deaths, Reeves began researching the old banking system. He spent years studying security systems and working for the alarm company that eventually installed Rivertown Bank's modern system. During that time, he gained access to archived records. What he found changed everything. The accounting error had been real. A small glitch in the early software had affected dozens of customers. Each individual loss was small enough to avoid attention. But together, the total reached millions of dollars. The bank had discovered the issue quietly and corrected it moving forward. But the past losses were never repaid. They called it a system error, Reeves said. Then they closed the files and moved on. Blake felt a chill move through him as the pieces began to fall into place. "You robbed the bank to get the money back," he said slowly. Reeves shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "I robbed the bank to retain it." Blake frowned. Return it to who? Reeves looked up for the first time with a hint of emotion in his eyes. The people who never got it back. The room fell silent as the meaning of his words settled in. Reeves explained that for years, anonymous envelopes had appeared in mailboxes across Brookdale and neighboring towns. Small amounts of cash with no return address. No explanation. Many recipients believed it was a mistake or a strange act of kindness. In reality, it had been Daniel Reeves working quietly in the shadows. Every robbery funded another round of envelopes. Every envelope carried a piece of what the bank had never retained. Blake leaned back in his chair, struggling to process the confession. The case he had chased for months was no longer simple. The man in front of him was both criminal and something else entirely. You stole over $100,000, Blake said softly. Reeves nodded. And you gave almost all of it away. Another nod. Why keep doing it for so long? Blake asked. Reeves took a slow breath. Because there were more names on the list than I expected. The courtroom months later was filled beyond capacity. Residents of Brookdale packed the seats, whispering quietly as the trial began. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of support. Many came because they had once opened an envelope and never known who sent it. The prosecution called Reeves a calculated criminal who had broken the law repeatedly without remorse. They described the months of planning, the careful timing, the repeated deception. The defense did not deny the robberies. Instead, they presented the list of affected customers and the evidence of anonymous donations. One by one, witnesses spoke about the envelopes they had received and the relief those small amounts had brought during difficult times. The courtroom felt divided in a way no one expected. Some saw a thief. Others saw a man who had tried to correct a wrong no one else would acknowledge. When the verdict finally arrived, the room held its breath. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom, heavy and final. Daniel Reeves accepted the sentence without protest. As officers led him away, he paused briefly and glanced toward the crowd. For a moment, the room felt silent and still, filled with emotions too complicated to name. In the months that followed, Rivertown Bank quietly reopened dozens of old case files. Investigations confirmed the software error Reeves had described. Compensation programs were announced. Millions of dollars were repaid to former customers. The town of Brookdale slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The bakery still opened early. The streets still filled with familiar faces. But the story of the ghost robber never faded completely. People continued to argue about him for years. Some insisted he was a criminal who deserved punishment. Others believed he had forced the truth into the light when no one else could. Detective Blake often thought about the case long after it ended. He remembered the months of frustration, the long nights, the moment of arrest inside the bank, and the calm voice that had said it took you long enough. In the end, the man who robbed the same bank 30 times did not become rich. He did not disappear. He did not escape justice. But he did something no one expected. He made the town question what justice truly meant. And sometimes, Blake realized, that question was more powerful than any answer.